Spare's ideas and how they were transmitted into both chaos magic and honestly just anyone in the period where people like Kenneth Grant were. Oh,
Episode 50,
sorry.
y'all. Still can't remember to put our phones on fucking silent. This podcast is over. I say as like my dog is howling in the background.
No, don't do it. She'll start doing it.
Oh, she's
Okay.
gonna...
Darken your room. Shut the door. Empty your mind. Yet you are still in great company. The Newman and your genius with all their media and your host of elementals and the ghost of your dead loves are there. They need no light by which to see, no words to speak, no motive to enact except through your own purely formed desire.
Imagine that there is a brilliant white light just above.
Is commentary on the magic art.
In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth.
Oh, that was very educational.
Now magic will take place. Don't be fooled by what I just said.
Welcome everyone. I am Sigilized Man Kennedy, and this is Kia Chaos Magic News, the only podcast that is getting real tired of doing this bit in general. Joining me is my co-host of The Flesh with invincible purpose, Akia Zod Crane. How you doing, Crane?
I don't get this reference.
You don't, because it's Akia Zod. It's in he uses it in, well, we'll talk about that later, because as everyone who's clicking on this episode already knows, this is the Austin Osman Spare Special.
Yep, the great granddaddy of chaos magic.
Right. For those of you who are new to Chaos Magic News, every 10 episodes, right on the what do you call that? What's an increment of 10?
I want to say decon.
Yeah, decanal or whatever. I'm trying to come up with something that's like, centennial or something. But every 10 episodes, we, instead of doing another regular episode where we goof around, have a bit of a chuckle at some occult subject we found, or talk about the horror story that's in the news, we take one occult figure or subject that we are just fascinated by, and we think that you guys will be too, and dedicate a whole episode to it, just talking about the ideas, what we think about it, what you can get out of it. And for episode 50, this is
episode 50 for us.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 2 years and some change now. We've made it to 50 episodes, and
yeah,
it feels appropriate to talk about Spare, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, of course. He was somebody who definitely, we have to talk about him at some point. And he's probably a little different than people we've done specials on so far. We did Michael Berdio, we did Carlos Castaneda, we did the Lovecraft special, where a lot of the facts of this man's life are a matter of public record at this point. There's very little speculation about was he telling the truth about this, or, at least in the regards of he didn't make up a guy who supposedly taught him everything he knew.
Well, maybe. But it's a different sort of thing.
He's not.
It's not like Castaneda, who claimed to be born somewhere, and they're like, "Well, you definitely weren't born there, sir."
How do you know? You think you're talking to Carlos Castaneda? How do you know?
How do you know that I didn't Don Draper him?
But then Spare is also probably one of the more popular occultists that you would like. You can find a lot more information about him than, probably Berdio and stuff like that.
Right, yeah. Well, there's whole biographies written about Spare.
Also, rightly so, because this man's influence, not just on chaos magic predominantly, but in general, because of chaos magic's far-reaching influence on everything else. We always joke about there are people that are not explicitly chaos magicians who have all of the hallmarks of chaos magic in their practice.
Right. Spare is someone whose influence on the occult is, well, it's probably
with
best
Crowley.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it runs parallel to Aleister Crowley, because where I think Aleister Crowley is whether you like him or not, or like what he's done to occultism or not, he's obviously the most influential occultist of the 20th century going into the 21st century. Spare, I think, is very much like that, but in a far more subtle way. Spare's ideas were transmitted into occultism during the period where people like Kenneth Grant were writing with chaos magic later and so on and so forth. These ideas took root in so many different areas, and just the techniques more than anything getting drafted into virtually every aspect of contemporary occultism, even if they don't specifically say, oh yeah, I got this from Austin Osman Spare, which makes sense because at the end of the
Well,
day, and I think if I can present this to everyone, they might agree with me by the end of this episode. I think Spare is probably the most misunderstood occultist in the contemporary age. And it's because of chaos magic.
is it because of chaos magic or is it because of Kenneth Grant?
Little of both, in fact.
Okay, well, do we want to dive into some preliminaries? Just give the broadest gist, because like we said, most of his biography is like these are not points of contention. These are information you can find anywhere. We'll just give you the very broad strokes.
Yeah, and we'll even give you the couple of things that are questionable, but they get repeated all the time, so you got to talk about them.
All right, Hardin County, Kentucky, February 12th, 1809. Born in a log cabin. Wait, this is the wrong guy. I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought. I don't know why I thought born in a log. He's like, oh, let's just do Abraham Lincoln.
Born in a log cabin. That's definitely becoming a thing. We've made that joke
I was
already.
born in a log. From now on, whenever we do anyone's biography, we just go born in a log cabin. We're just a couple goofy guys with a magic podcast. A couple goofy fellas.
All right, come on.
All right, so December 30th, 1886 in Yorkshire, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was born in Yorkshire, working class. They end up moving to London almost immediately, and he basically stays in London most of his life. At a exceptionally young age, I believe he's the youngest ever to be part of the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, at least youngest at the time. So
Right.
despite the working class background, he develops his skills as an artist very rapidly, and he's kind of a wunderkind almost, coming on the scene where he's sort of a big deal just because he is a slightly out of the box artist, and he's got I don't know what to say. Even his early work already has the trappings of somebody who clearly has these spiritual, spooky woo-woo influences. Where they came from explicitly, I'm not sure. By the time he's 18, he's putting out publications, and his art is actually getting around. So he does quite well for himself very early on, which is it's nice. A lot of times when you hear about artists, it's like, oh yeah, by the time he was 50, he had sold 10 paintings. So by the time he's like in basically like early 20s, I think, Aleister Crowley, of all people, besides like the more legitimate artistic credence he's getting, Aleister Crowley sees his art and is like, yeah, this is some woo-woo shit. I know it.
I believe Spare was practicing occultism at that time because by 1905, when he's 18, he puts out his first spooky book, as it were, and it's
Earth
clearly
Inferno?
influenced by it's clearly it's clearly influenced by Blavatsky. It has Omar Khayyam quotes in it. It's got Inferno stuff in it. He talks about Kia and Zeus by this point already, so he's already there. He's already there by that point.
Well, and now I do know that when he was 17, he is talking in an interview and he says, I'm going to invent my own religion, which that is what we would now call the Zeus Kia cultists, which
right. He
didn't
would
come
never
up with
call
that
it
name.
that, but
That's an invention of Kenneth Grant, but it does have the basis, Zeus, Kia, and we'll get into what those actually mean in a minute. But Aleister Crowley actually invites him into the AA, and he does stuff for the equinox, and he's they have a little bit of back and forth correspondence, and because it's Aleister Crowley, the same thing that happens always is the thing that happens, is that there's a falling out.
I like you. I like you. And now I fucking hate you.
Yeah. And now part of it, I'm sure, is motivated by Spare's own personal magical underpinnings were already there. So I think when he was introduced to ceremonial magic, he probably took it in, and this is speculation, but we do know for a fact he had a severe falling out with ceremonial magic. Now, the other thing is Crowley did too. So it's kind of interesting in that regard. But he doesn't actually become a full-fledged member of the AA Although I believe Kenneth Grant says something to the effect of like he was conferred the 8th degree and then they like took it back. Or like, oh no, he didn't really get it, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't remember
The
what
bigger thing is that
Grant's weirdness of equating the AA and the OTO is kind of problematic in that
Oh
sense
yeah, that's
anyway.
a whole other I forgot about that part too. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
The more important part is that like so him and Crowley actually have correspondences. There's the idea that he's getting brought into the order a little bit. Then there's the falling out after a while. And he being Aleister Crowley refers to Spare as a black brother and who's lost who's lost to the realm of narcissists or something like that.
Yeah, he essentially says like, "Oh man, everyone knows that Spare was a great magician and a great artist, but he just lost his fucking head. He wasn't.
Yeah, he lost the plot.
He's not doing the
Yeah,
work.
which is
More
interesting.
positive than he says about a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a little better than he does say about some folks, where he's just like, "Nah, this was a bullshit artist." And if
This
I
is a
see him,
con man and a charlatan who has stolen from the order.
yeah, he
Stomp
took my
on
shit.
sight.
Yeah, but Spare also probably didn't have any interest in taking anything from Crowley. He was like, I'm gonna burn these robes you gave me." They
There's
got
actually a
lice on 'em.
couple points of interest we'll get to later where we're talking about the book where you can see a sort of connection between what Crowley's talking about. But then again, I feel like it's probably running parallel rather than something that he genuinely was influenced by.
There's a couple other notable things. He gets conscripted into World War One. He kind of gets off relatively easy because he doesn't have to actually go and shoot people. He gets to like be an artist and stuff. He continues doing like small publications. He only put out about 4 books in his life, but he made a pretty sizable amount of art in his lifetime, which is just everywhere. And there are at least a large portion of Spare's work that you know it on sight. He has some more traditional paintings, but he's got a lot of stuff that when you see it, it's like, yeah, that's Spare, or that's somebody who saw a lot of Spare and tried to ape it. After the war, he goes back. His art is unappreciated in his time after that initial burst onto the scene. A lot of it is chalked up to just the art scene was moving in different directions.
Right. And having, Spare is very dense and hard to understand. A lot of the reviews, even for his earlier work, when there was a lot of positivity behind it, was like, essentially no one's arguing that Spare isn't a great artist, but what the hell is he drawing?
Yeah, yeah. There's there's a thing where it's like stronger medicine for the average man or something like that, which is it's in a way it's a very good compliment to say that like you're you're almost above other people, but at the same time you can be an amazing artist. If no one's interested in buying it, you're going to go hungry, and he quite often did. By the time World War II is coming around, there is a notable story that it's repeated a lot to the point that like I guess we're just supposed to take it as fact, but he ends up somehow getting a commission from like Adolf Hitler to when he being a super big like fuck Nazis type of guy, just in his completes all of his sensibilities. He has a quote where it's like, "If you're the Superman, let me forever be an animal."
Yeah, hang on. The story as presented when I first saw it was that a member of the German embassy found one of his portraits, which was, interesting, and he sent it off to the Fuhrer because the Fuhrer's obviously a big artist himself. If you don't know the story,
Well, he wasn't that big of an artist. He didn't get in.
At any rate, when Hitler sees it, he's like, "Oh, this is great. I want him to do my portrait." And then what he did was send him a self-portrait of himself with the Hitler mustache and supposedly wrote on the back of it, "Only from negations can I wholesomely conceive you, for I know of no courage sufficient to stomach your aspirations and ultimate. If you are Superman, let me be forever animal."
That's the story. And notably during the war, his art studio and his home was bombed in the Blitz, and he called it Hitler's revenge. It was probably the mark of a very steep decline because he never really fully recovers after that. He's homeless. He actually doesn't he just doesn't do well in general.
Well, and he had already been living in poverty from about the peak of his professional success up until about the peak of surrealism. in like right before World War II breaks out, and he starts doing better because people are like, "Oh, check it out." It's like this guy was doing surrealism before surrealism, but he's still living in poverty for most of his life. And then the war obviously makes that. He does try to enlist during the war apparently, but he gets told that he's too old.
Yeah, because he's in his 40s by then.
Yeah, well, he ardently hates Nazis, but he's also broke as shit and has nothing going for him at this point too.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's a sad lot for a lot of artists. It's a shame because he starts out very promising, and then through factors that aren't necessarily his own, of like somebody who is consistently, in my opinion at least, very good work. It's just the taste and sensibilities of the time were not. Where I don't want to be like they weren't ready for it, but it just they weren't. He was not aligned with the aesthetics of the time, and that's just the fate of a lot of artists, even the great mystical ones.
Well, he seems to come in and out of it a lot is really what it seems to be. It's like he's the toast of the town, but the art world's fickle and it doesn't hold on with him. Because after the war, he does have a bit of a comeback, right? He starts
Yeah.
making kind of like portraits of famous people, essentially. Like
Yeah, but then you
some
also
great thinkers, some like just movie stars, but it works for him.
but then like this is also the period where you hear of him doing stuff like doing drawings for beer money basically at bars.
Oh, well, allegedly he was always doing that from what I heard. He was a big fan of being like just slocking off something real quick and being like, give me a 5 note for this so I can buy a pint.
I guess if you're like a good artist, you can do that. That's sort of like what's the Dali did shit like that too, didn't he? Or Picasso, where they would like make drawings instead of paying for the meal. It's like this is gonna be worth a lot. Oh, just hold on to that. I'm telling you. But what it amounts to is he always had a less than stable financial existence. But and I don't want to use this as like a dodge, but you'll notice a great many of what we would consider the spiritually forward, the enlightened or the mystical, are people that don't need it. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that he was totally fine with being broke and living in poverty and stuff like that, but he was also like he was a type of person that was inclined to be able to make something useful out of it. Like it's a bad situation, but I can at least do something. Or in the pursuit of the magical, mystical life, as it were, something like that can have despite its struggles, there can be some form of benefits to it. And the idea of when you know how to properly make use of adversity. Although maybe I don't want to I don't want to glam. That's the problem too. Is I also don't want to glamorize poverty because I've been poor, still poor, but like I'm not.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
getting
always
my
a
house.
it's always a tough thing to look at figures that seem to have such great brilliance to them and then being like, well, yeah, well, they were living in squalor. And it's not like Spare was like, oh, I'm fine living in squalor. I don't care. I'm just going to keep doing my own thing. We've been told multiple times that he was miserable and he hated it. He was not happy just living in squalor. It's
Yeah.
the same that you hear about that with Crowley too, where a lot of people not in the know be like, oh, well, Crowley was content to be, living off of what he could, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, Crowley was absolutely miserable.
But
Crowley hated
also
life.
lived a continuous life of decadence.
Right, up until he didn't.
Until he runs out of money. And he ran out of money multiple times.
Do we want to talk about what really preserves Austin Osman Spare for most of us?
Absolutely.
Right after the war, Mr. Spare meets a young artist by the name of Steffi Grant.
Yep.
And she introduces him to her husband, a Mr. Kenneth Grant.
Oh boy, we brought him back.
Ah, man.
Just when you think
Every single special we have talked about Kenneth Grant. You've recognized that, right?
did we talk about him in the Castaneda one?
Yeah, because we made the comparison that making up shit is cool.
It's fun to lie.
Yeah, it's fun to lie.
Did we bring him up in the Grant Morrison special?
I feel like we must have. Maybe we didn't, but I feel like
No, we just said Grant a lot. So you made that
it's
mistake.
close enough.
Yeah, so the Grants, and I think Steffi Grant being a great magician and artist in her own right. If you haven't seen Steffi Grant's work, it's fantastic. Love it. Absolutely love it. Every occult writer needs a Steffi Grant in their life to give them like cool artwork. Unless you're Spare, where you can do both. After meeting, the Grants and Spare become friends. They do a lot of hanging around together, drinking in the pub, sharing books on spooky woo woo stuff. And Grant, already having fraternized with Crowley, decides like, all right, I've got more spooky woo woo from people who I think are like ascended masters. Let me figure out what I can get from him. And particularly in the Typhonian trilogies, he starts synthesizing Crowley and Spare, which is funny because like they didn't like each other, but he's like, nah, I'm gonna put them together. We're gonna make it work. Not only that, but Grant actually gets Spare to start writing again. Meeting the Grants and having that renewed occult interest gets Spare to start writing again, has him branch out and sort of explore the notions of witchcraft, as in like the traditional witch cult of England. He says he says this, I believe, and like Grant definitely repeats it about like he learned about like the actual witches Sabbath stuff by meeting an older witch crone lady who like taught and initiated him. And we haven't touched on it, but Spare has a weird sex thing with like old ugly ladies.
Well, he's got a clear sort of issue with women in general, to be honest. Like, it's not, I wouldn't say it's, I don't know if it borders on sexism. I'll say that.
Yeah.
There are several places in his writings where he makes the comment of of desiring women being bad and having male incarnation is important. It's very interesting. We'll talk about it later, but it gets a little odd. It makes it
Yeah, but
you start to get
but
the
at this
feeling that he gets kind of incelly almost.
He's just living in his house with a bunch of cats talking about how women ain't shit. Them Stacys are gonna steal your magic. But at the same time, he gets interested in like the sort of traditional witchcrafty things and sort of an exploration of like and Grant is super big on this too, the idea of like seeing past the veneer of like the weird degenerative conditions of modern witchcraft and seeing what the actual secret is. And Grant always just goes back to it's sex magic. Everything is sex magic. Every symbol and tradition, and it all goes back to it's sex magic.
Right. Well, and Spare is very similar because Spare's biggest concern is sexuality. But what he means by sexuality is very different than what I think Grant gets at.
Yeah, but at the same time, Grant's as Grant filters Spare's work into the Typhonian trilogies, it does take on the flavoring of things that Grant is already writing about. So that's something you have to contend with. But at the same time, Spare was also getting other stuff out at the time that Grant was able to help circulate and publish and
Well,
things
it's
like
through
that.
their
And
friendship that I think Spare gets interested again in writing occult and esoteric works. And
oh
it
yeah,
shows
that's what I'm
because
saying.
the two works he puts out post Grant friendship are some of the most lucid and clear delineations of his magical theories that we get, even if they are still very much uh stuff you have to read a couple times and then scratch your head at. But compared to like the Book of Pleasure,
Which is like it's Greek to me. At least the first time I read it, it was like, what the I don't understand any of this.
yeah, well, we'll talk about that. Um, well, I guess from there, oh, and he
Now,
dies. People die.
oh, I forgot. Yeah, at some point he died.
Yeah, his appendix bursts and he goes downhill very quickly. So, bye bye, Mr. Spare. We'll remember you dearly.
So, yeah, we got so caught up in the continuing works, and also it's worth noting Grant publishes a entire book called Zeus Speaks, which is talking about his relationship with Grant. He really does, in the same way that he did for Michael Burdio, he helps get this man's name out there, and he was already known, but he is further preserved and transmitted further down the line because Grant was writing books of him right up until like the 90s, like almost I think 98 is when Zeus Speaks came out.
Mm-hmm.
By then, chaos magic is already a thing, which has the huge influence of Spare to start with. But he kept pulling for his homie, saying, "Hey, this guy was important," and I think everyone would agree. But yeah, we got so caught up in the whole inner workings of where this guy has been and why people know him. We also forgot to mention that he does in fact die.
Right.
But like you said, it was like his appendix burst. By the time he gets to the hospital, it's basically too late.
And
He's
it's
done.
56 when he dies. So that's the right before the second occult revival really starts to hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crowley had died a couple years before this.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, it's a shame that this is where the whole artist unappreciated and their time thing really comes into full swing, because it's not only is Spare's art not appreciated at times, like his occult writings don't become the notable titanic influence until almost another 10, 15, 20 years later.
Right. Yeah. It's even as they're preserved and transmitted through chaos magic, there's still not nearly as much availability of the firsthand sources. And once those really become like everywhere, in the contemporary internet age, Spare is lauded as probably everyone's favorite occultist. Let's be honest, he's one of the people that,
He's definitely up there.
yeah, people, if you want to talk about if your greats as far as occultism come down to Spare, Crowley, and then pick your somewhat unorthodox third pick there. What, you like Alice Bailey? Sure.
I don't know. Like, I feel like you could throw Dion Fortune up there. She's
Oh yeah, that's what I'm getting at. But like that's my point, is that if you're talking about modern occultism, you only have so many people you can pick from, and Spare and Crowley are definitely the big two, I think. Maybe that's just because that's our perspective, but
yeah.
think of, but still, just name me some more late 20th century occultists, and tell me, are they really that much more influential than either of those?
just people being angry, calling us dude bros. It's like, oh yeah, you like Crowley and Spare, you fucking cliches.
Yeah. Well, everyone does. That's my point.
Not me. All of my occultism comes directly from translations of ancient Greek texts and
Justin Sledge
David Lynch films.
Esoterica.
Well, yeah, there you go. Okay. So that's sort of him as an individual. Now we can get into his works, I suppose, which are the bigger deal.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm more interested in. The way I did this was I went through the major works that were published in his lifetime, because there's lots of things that got published afterwards. And I just reread them and I wrote down a bunch of notes, and I think we're just going to kind of talk about them in order. Does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a clear growth in Spare's work that you see through these various things that he's published that are
Like a
mixtures of,
teratoma or
yeah, honestly.
like an extra nipple.
I would like to say that it becomes clearer and more systematized as it goes on, but I don't think it does, because my big contention is I don't think that Spare is a theoretical kind of writer. I think that Spare is giving you like poetic, aphoristic kind of things for you to take to heart and try to do something with. Like reading the Book of Pleasure is not the same thing as reading something like Liber ABBA or Liber Null or Advanced Magic for Beginners.
He's not writing instruction manuals. He's not, in a way, he's not even ascribing practices so much as he is trying to illustrate the means by which you can find your own practices. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, he does give, I think, two very important practices that will go on throughout the rest of his work and get picked up by chaos magic later. But even with those, they're not so distinct. They're not so direct. It's not until, again, the later stuff he writes after Kenneth Grant meets him and kind of revitalizes him that he writes stuff that I think is genuinely like, okay, this is Spare giving you stuff to do. But even then, he doesn't really lose the aphoristic sort of poetic way of talking about this stuff. He doesn't tell you, it's not like reading a Hyatt thing where he's like, all right, now focus on your jaw and relax this and breathe in 4 times and breathe out 5 times. It's not like that sort of thing. This is ideas he's trying to impart to you with the base understanding that anything I tell you is going to be misleading to you in some sort of way.
Yeah, all my statements are provisional, and I'm simply trying to elucidate a view to you that by its nature is not easily articulated, and other pretentious things.
So Earth Inferno is the first work that he puts out that we can call occult, and it's certainly got all of that in there. Pretty much all the staples of Spare's later thought are already in here, if not directly addressed, at least within the art itself. I mean, one of the first, and that's the thing to note about this book is that it is, yeah, it's like 20 to 30 pages, and it's mostly art. There are various bits of text and longer form poetic pieces, even quotes from other works like again Omar Khayyam, Inferno by Dante. All these things have quotes and various things in here, but most of it is art, and he's trying to impart these ideas via art, it seems. But everything, Kia, Zod, ideas that and words he'll pick up later. He's got the alpha and omega that he talks about quite a bit. Illusion and desire, all these things are all in here. Overall, this work kind of gives you it's like getting hit with a flashbang. It's if you don't know anything about Spare and you read this, you're going to be completely fucking lost. But it will present a sort of pseudo mystical idea. But if you do know stuff about Spare, you're like trying to pick up on all the symbols and ideas that you know are in there because you're like, oh, I know what that means. I think just going through my notes here, I'll talk about the things that I thought were interesting. Almost immediately, he's got a lot to say about the problems of conventionality, which is I think is a great word, and he doesn't use it anywhere else, which is kind of a shame. But literally the first thing we see, it's Earth, and it's a picture of this large woman laying out on something, and then lots of disturbed and sad looking people huddled together around it. The desertion of the quote unquote universal woman lying barren on the parapet of the subconsciousness in humanity, and humanity sinking into the pit of conventionality. Hail, the convention of the age is nearing its limit, and with it a resurrection of the primitive woman. So right there, the very first thing we see is already an idea that if you know anything about Spare, you see a lot in, because he's against virtually any sense of normativity or conventionality. That's the big thing he'll get into in the Book of Pleasure later. But in general, this doesn't give you anything you can look at other than out of seeing the sort of ideas that will later become important in his work.
It's a little too opaque to really get anything out of yet. It's right now it's in that preliminary stage of like showing the influences and weird stuff that's going on without really spelling much out.
Yeah, and it's very existential, honestly. It's the premise of this book allegedly was he took the concept of Blavatsky that Earth is already hell, which is not just a Blavatsky thing. That's sort of an esoteric in general type of idea.
Would it be a dick? It's like Sartre said it too. He said hell was other people, which same
which
thing.
are on Earth, so that makes sense. At any rate, I would recommend that you really look at it yourself. He mentions the Book of Kia. He mentions Zod. He doesn't use Zos yet, but all of these sorts of things are in here. I'll read a couple of random quotes that I feel like give you the ideas that he's trying to present to you. Pleasure in pleasure is the expectation of the actual, but the actual is a crude awakening from the blindness. While that gesture knowledge exposes death only, and the mirror of truth reveals not, but evolution. And that's now you see why I'm talking about. Like, I don't think that Spare is a theoretical writer in the slightest, because he's just trying to get these ideas across to you. But none of this is a particular prescription, especially not in this work, which seems to be trying to communicate more than anything these sort of inexplicable ideas that he has. He's constantly talking about death and the self and the flesh and the relation of heaven and hell to earth. All of which just really comes down to a sort of existential problem of thought and belief. He uses the term intrinsic being at one point as sort of I don't want to use it as a stand-in for reality, because he says that later. The dwellers on the threshold. As we dwell on the threshold to one extreme, the intrinsic being is prematurely nascent, creating a chaos of reflection. When we gaze into the mirror of our self and see our works as others judge them, then we realize our insignificance to the incomprehensible intellect of the absolute Kia. parentheses, the omniscient, and find how subcutaneous our attainments are. Alas, we are children of earth. And then under it, it says, this I will call the hell of intrinsic being. This entire work is things like that. It's only things that can be put together upon looking deeper into Spare's ideas. As it presents itself, it's sort of an incomprehensible poetic dirge. It's very spooky. It's very existential.
But on a certain level, attempting to illustrate the inseparable human condition of like example, the statement of we are things of the earth, while he's describing sort of the omnipresent, omniscient Kia as sort of an all, as sort of a grander or a penultimate reality, but saying that you, as you are trapped in this sort of embodiment, maybe not trapped, but sort of it is simply what you've got. That you are always in a way always going to be tethered to an embodiment, while there is the grander and the ultimate that you can attempt to reach, but always sort of trapped within.
The clearest he gets right here is at the end, I think. And it might be disappointing for people in a sense because we don't get to talk so much about the ideas that are popular for Spare later, but this is important because it gives you the grounding of the kind of world Spare's attempts at symbolism and belief and the subconscious really come from. Finis. Alas, on entering at the gates of life, lo, I beheld knowledge, the jester, capsizing the feast of illusion. Then drawing aside false truth, he shewed us all, the world, the flesh, and the being. This is the Alpha and Omega. The illustration we get with that is fascinating. We'll put it up on the screen here maybe for you. And if you're listening to this audio, go find the book. You can download it really easily. It's a angel-like figure and the jester that he was speaking of. But on the angel-like figure, we see the world, the flesh, and the devil written. Just an interesting difference in when we relate it back to his decrying of intrinsic being, then maybe something to be said there. But yeah, overall, he's presenting this sort of pseudo mystical idea of life and its existential problems being a matter of singularity and separation from a omnipresent and omniscient being, or an omnipresent and omniscient existence. It's hard to it's hard to parse here, but what I think he's ultimately trying to get at is there is a sort of non-dual mystical oneness that we can get at with Kia. And why didn't I just use the word transcendence? That's the one I always use. But there's a transcendent reality that goes beyond everything we understand as being. And the existential condition of being a person is inherently sort of negative and bad, and you can only get out of it through a not fully formulated concept, but what he will later call self-love.
Right. And this, in a way, this can actually relate back to some ideas that we've been kicking around at least in relation to this book that we've mentioned in passing that is getting worked on. But the notion that the only way to know the transcendent is itself anchored in its opposite, if that makes sense. Be in a position where you can realize the transcendent quality that is beyond your embodied capacity, you have to be embodied. The entire human apparatus that you have is the trap and the key. It is the gate. What is it? The way and the gate and the keeper of the gate.
Yeah.
It's in the idea of like you can't attempt to separate yourself from the body because you are the body. It is there. You can't separate yourself. You can't separate your body from anything else in the universe any more than you can separate you from the body. So the only method you can have to understand the illusionary nature of the reality you perceive versus the grand transcendent other or non-self or non-being is through that same kind of embodiment. And I think in a way that is what Spare is suggesting.
Well, right, and that's why concept of self is so radical and important through this, because Spare's concept of self ultimately is expanding out beyond everything that we can think of as the self, in the same way his attempts at getting us to go beyond belief or to expand your understanding of quote unquote reality and truth to be far more malleable and open to possibility. Ultimately, it's all possibilities, just as all things are the self. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves there.
And to his credit, Peter Carroll will take that ball and run with it too, with his notions of the colonial being, or the ultimate lack of a fundamental self, that suggests that the magician does have the ability to expand themselves into a fuller or a greater multi-directional, multi-personaed, multifaceted way of being.
Yes, and I think that will play into the split that I'm going to talk about later with Carol and Spare here, but I'll
We'll keep going.
just to give the taste of it, right? I think it's a difference between a mystical and romantic view of this sort of thing and a utilitarian point of view.
Okay.
If that will make sense later, maybe. Here I'm going to read the last thing from Earth Inferno, just because I think this gives you a good idea of where we're going into with the Book of Pleasure. My ambition is dead, died premature, and with it the love of care. Also the jewel in the lotus. The morrow holds naught for me, save sin and death. I am even exempt from my own created pleasures. The barrenness of this life but remains. Yet in despair we begin to see true light. In weakness we can become strong. Amen. Revere the Kia, and your mind will become tranquil. Moving on to what we're going to spend the most of this segment talking about now, because this one we could have done just a special on this freaking book, for to be completely honest. This thing's huge. It's got so much in it, and everything else that we'll talk about Spare will ultimately come back to this book in some way, I think. I mean, before we haven't even started talking about it, and I've already had to reference it to make sense of Earth Inferno, right?
Yes. And that would be what, the Book of Pleasure?
This is the Book of Pleasure, the psychology of ecstasy. This is the book. It's 104 pages. It's significantly longer than most of what Spare has written elsewhere.
But in the grand scheme, pretty short too.
Oh, yes, it's still
Like
very
100
short.
pages?
Again,
Shit.
it's no Liber Null or Libra Abba.
Yeah, you could. Well, I think even Liber Null and Psychonaut isn't. It's longer than that, but it still isn't that long. But it's interesting to think that you could get the entire works of Spare in something that was smaller than like the Bible your grandma gave you because you got to First Communion.
Yeah, depending. If you wanted to include all the art, you'd have to do some wonky stuff, but that's more of a formatting issue than a space issue.
Now I just got to look up the Austin Osman Spare complete works. I need like a coffee table book for that.
I feel like somebody's probably done something like that at this point. Anyway, so yeah, this is the one that probably lays out Spare's ideas, and as I said, he gives us like two solid practices in this book in between the rest of his sort of, again, I don't want to call it theory. I don't think it's self-consistent enough to be theory. It's full of contradictions, and he bemoans certain things while then lauding them later. It's a rigmarole. It's again, I think it's poetry. I think it's imparting ideas in a way that you're taking them in artistically and maybe even subconsciously.
Well, it's also that thing of the idea of books as spells, of sometimes the beauty of an experience reading something isn't so much the rigor of imparting information into you, but more of the feelings and ideas that are allowed to be fed into your brain and allowed to do their work in the dark, as it were, carrying you through with a sensation and ideas and filling your head with images and words and really amping you up. But also, to an extent, this book is written the way it is and exists the way that it does, in the idea that some things might feel contradictory, or at the very least, things are so open to multi levels of interpretation, or interpretations that might completely contradict one another, is because of the nature of what he is trying to write. It does step into the territory of the ineffable, the the Tao, the type of thing that you can't point at it, you can't describe it.
Yeah, and that's a great place to start. We're going to go back in a moment, but I want to read just this one little segment. Kia, in its transcendental and conceivable manifestation. Of name, it has no name to designate it. I call it Kia. I dare not claim it as myself. The Kia which can be expressed by conceivable ideas is not the eternal Kia, which burns up all belief, but is the archetype of self, the slavery of mortality. Endeavoring to describe it, I write what may be, but not usually called, the Book of Lies. The unorthodox of the originable, or a volant sight that conveys somehow by the incidental that truth is somewhere. The Kia which can be vaguely expressed in the words is the neither, the unmodified I, that is the sensation of omnipresence, the illumination symbolically transcribed in the sacred alphabet, and of which I am about to write. Its emanation is its own intensity, but not necessariness. It has and ever will exist. The virgin quantum, by its exuberance, we have gained existence. There, clear as day, right?
Yeah, no questions.
Yeah, not it's like why would anyone be confused? Yeah, so that again, that's what Spare writes like. It's if you've read any sort of like French or German philosophy at any point in your life, you're like, oh, I know what he's doing here. He's using big words to sound more photosynthesis. But he is expressing something to you in a very concrete sort of way, but it's not an easy idea to get. And he must have known that on some level, because the actual start of the book is definitions. I'm serious. Page 1 of this is definitions. And thank God, because if he didn't actually give all these definitions, I'm not quite sure that anyone would have any clue what the fuck he was talking about. It's really hard to grasp what he's getting at with some of these things. And even his definitions aren't the clearest cut, but they at least point you in a direction of what is going on here. So I'm just going to read this real quick. The words God, religions, faith, morals, woman, etc., parentheses, they being forms of belief, are used as expressing different quote-unquote means as controlling and expressing desire, an idea of unity by fear in some form or another which must spell bondage, the imagined limits extended by science which adds a dearly paid inch to our height. No more. So what he's trying to express there is that what we just said. He's using words and ideas to express something that doesn't quite get grasped in the meanings of those words. Spare's theory is that concepts and ideas put what word do we want to use here? An experiential limit, maybe?
Yeah.
An experiential limit on what is perceptible and what can appear as existent to an individual. It's a very complicated idea. That's why the problem with simplifying it to when you believe stuff, that's all you can perceive, like the Robert Anton Wilson way, is similar, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah, it doesn't quite. It's trying to, it's by its nature trying to make those sort of statements make sense. But the issue of like, as you simplify, you're going to inherently leave something out, or worse yet, you'll make something change its meaning or change how it can be interpreted because you're leaving out the nuance.
Right.
Which, like, example, happens with Buddhism all the time,
Right, yeah, exactly.
We're all Buddhas, so why do I need to meditate? Why do I need to practice the Dharma if we are all already enlightened and everything's perfect in this moment?
Yeah.
All right, great, go for it. See how that works out for you.
I'll give the quick definitions because they're all long and like that, but this is what we have. And it'll be important later because we get a definition of Kia from Peter Carroll that makes me scratch my head in relation to this. Kia, the absolute freedom in which being free is mighty enough to be, quote, reality, unquote, and free at any time. Therefore, is not potential or manifest, parentheses, except as its instant possibility by ideas of freedom or, quote, means, unquote, but by the ego being free to receive it, by being free of ideas about it, and by not believing. The less said of it, Kia, the less obscure is it. Remember, evolution teaches by terrible punishments that conception is ultimate reality, but not ultimate freedom from evolution. He then defines virtue, pure art, vice, fear, belief, faith, control, science, and the like. So we already have another sort of ethical implication of Spare. It's the same thing that makes him say that conventionality and normal are hell.
It's very the only sin is repression.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it overall goes back to his theory that reality as experienced by any given individual is a matter of conceptual and limiting belief, quote unquote, which for Spare gets a little more complicated. We can almost say it's like you have, you and I talk about the background a lot,
Right.
how we have this background of practical know-how of how to exist in the world and why that's important to magic and so on. Spare has that sort of, or Robert Anton Wilson will call it the unconscious programming of your reality tunnel, that sort of thing. That's what we're talking about. These sorts of things that exist somehow beyond our conscious reflection and knowledge, as it were.
The automatic apprehension and understanding of the world, where it's like sometimes you can look at something and figure out what it is. Sometimes you look at something and you instantly know what it is, you know? And in fact, most of the things you encounter in your day-to-day world, you do not have to question. You do not consciously apprehend how you're perceiving things. You don't think about walking across the room. You just know how to walk across a room.
Right, and that's exactly what Spare is talking about. Spare's idea is that all of those sorts of things are putting limits on your existence. They're separating you from the totality of self and Kia and so on and so forth. But the way around that is the very important concept that we're going to continually come back to here, which is
Jerking off on
self-love.
squiggles.
Self-love. And this is important because now you have to think about this definition that I'm about to give you anytime he uses the term self-love. Self-love, a mental state, mood, or condition caused by the emotion of laughter becoming the principle that allows the ego appreciation or universal association in permitting inclusion before conception.
You hear that, and everyone who has read Liber Null has some things turning in their head, because now you're thinking about things that you can see where certain influences and where certain things are getting presented. The notion of laughter being the non-dual state of being, the idea of a emotional mental state that is able to force a break from these types of conceptions, the thing that comes in before that automatic apprehension that I'm talking about.
Yeah, this is gnosis. This is where that comes from. It's not, again, because Spare's not really a chaos magician, as people will argue with us about, but Spare's not quite the same. But the idea that there is a cognitive state that you can reach by doing certain things, and that itself being able to cause some sort of change in reality or our experience. And the way you do that is this final thing that he's going to define, which is exhaustion. That state of vacuity brought by exhausting a desire by some means of dissipation when the mood corresponds to the nature of the desire, i.e., when the mind is worried because of the non fulfillment of such desire and seeks relief. By seizing this mood and living, the resultant vacuity is sensitive to the subtle suggestion of the sigil. And there you go. He even mentioned sigils now, which he didn't define, but he says it.
Yeah, but he goes into what a sigil is and how to make it in this.
Right.
So what we're seeing is the bedrock of gnosis is the notion of, by your ability to tap into that desire that needs to be fulfilled but is frustrated, and through the methods of that sort of superseding of that automatic apprehension of reality, or the conceptual parts of the mind that and I hate using words like this because they don't, they're going to get increasingly harder to use, like when you talk mind, body, and all the inherent inseparability of a lot of these things. But this is more or less the bedrock that we get gnosis from, is that there is Kia, which is a grander, transcendent, sort of ultimate reality, can only be experienced through sort of shades and degrees, that you are able to invoke some sort of state of being that supersedes your ordinary state of being. And through the use of that, you can stimulate certain desires that allow magic to happen. He uses the sigil in this example, but what he means is that you're able to allow magic to happen, where certain tools or implements or practices are given a root in to the source of your experience, which is Kia.
Right. And I think what Spare ultimately is suggesting does have sort of a metaphysical implication of like idealism, or I don't know. I don't really have a great word for it, but you know, Spare falls into straight up solipsism at various times, at least in the sense that he has an overall identity with all of reality and everyone that exists through a complicated tale of reincarnation.
And evolution.
And yes, and evolution. Evolution is incredibly important to Spare. It's odd, you don't realize it, but it's probably one of the most important concepts for him. All of that being said, I'm just going to kind of flip through the chapters and go along with my notes like I did last time. So this is, and all of his chapters have big, long titles like this. Like, this is different religions and doctrines as means to pleasure, freedom, and power. In this chapter, this is where I was telling you about earlier, where he decides to take everyone to town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this
He gives I'm just going to read it because I think it gives a good outline of what we've already talked about, said in his sort of poetic register. What is there to believe but in self? In self is the negation of completeness as reality. No man has seen self at any time. We are what we believe and what it implies by a process of time in the conceptual. Creation is caused by this bondage to formula. That's basically what we were just saying, right?
right? Yeah.
Actions are the expressions of ideas bound up in the belief. They, being inherent or obscure, their operation indirect, easily they deceive introspection. Fruits of actions are twofold: heaven or hell, their unity or nothingness, purgatory or indifference. In heaven there is the desire for woman, hell the desire intense. Purgatory is the expectation delayed, indifference but disappointment till recovery. Then verily they are one and the same. The wise pleasure seeker, having realized they are different degrees of desire and never desirable, gives up both virtue and vice and becomes a Kiaist. Riding the shark of his desire, he crosses the ocean of the dual principle and engages himself in self-love. This is pretty much the only area I can ever see Spare telling you something akin to, hey, this is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Because everywhere else he'll tell you not to really repeat him, other than explaining how to do the death posture, or rather what the death posture is, and making sigils. But this is him explaining to you, like, if you give up all desire in the way that I'm talking about and engage yourself in self-love, which is the only thing that Spare cares about. Spare thinks that everything in existence is about reaching back to that state and getting there. He's got a term for it. He's a Kiaist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I guess if you read too much of this and it starts resonating, you think, maybe he knows what he's talking about. Now you're a Kiaist. You're not a chaos magician, apparently. But you can even see in the Liber Null influence of the inability to escape the inherent dualism of being, except through, well, Carol really puts it out to the point of like, you're not really able to escape the dualism. It's everything is inherently dual by virtue of being your dual. You can't really get out of what's the quote where it's like the labyrinth moves and all you can do is keep your eyes on the wall. There's really no way out of it. But he does acknowledge that there is, Carol would acknowledge the notion of Kia. Now, his definition of Kia, as we're going to touch on, doesn't fit quite the same. But the idea of the magician understanding that, heaven and hell, purgatory and limbo are all degrees of the same thing. And that because they are inherently arbitrary and relational and not tied to anything concrete and objective. So
there's a very real sense where Spare thinks that belief and desire are one and the same, but they are always at an odds with each other. That's why his whole concept of repressing from the conscious and the lived experience of something is what you have to do to get it to manifest. You have to, forget about it entirely, forget that it's there, and then it will come into your existence.
Right.
Religions are the projection of incapacity, the imagination of fear, the veneer of superstition. That paradox is truth. He's got a footnote here that says that God is always in heaven and that the almighty inconceivable emanates its conception or negation, commits suicide, etc. While oftentimes the ornamentation of imbecility, as a virtue in the idea to maximize pleasure, chiefly remit your sins and excuse them. It is but ceremonial, the expression of puppetry to the governing fear. Anyway, yeah, he just goes on about that. But what Spare's getting at here is this idea that he's going to take on about God and how we deal with various religious ideas, is that they're all these projections of subconscious desires. And that's not actually a crazy magic idea. That's what like Feuerbach and Freud were telling you. Yeah, like you believe in God by projecting out all these qualities of your own incapacity.
And then Spare will notably refer to Freud and Jung as junk and fraud. So that shows that even if they might have a semblance of agreement here, I think Spare's notion of unconscious desires and the way that they are brought out doesn't necessarily jibe with him. And like, I think he's probably thinks that both Freud and Jung were missing something very important in all of this.
That is something that gets forgotten here, is that he refers to this as the psychology of ecstasy in the title. And it very much is a book on psychology. It's psychology that is incredibly spooky and mystical, but most of what Spare is talking about is cognition and the mind. And the reason he does that is because he's constantly referring away from body and the sort of physical manifestation of existence in favor of a greater transcendent sort of consciousness, which, how can I say this? It's why he uses the subconscious instead of unconscious. He has this, it's almost like Spare thinks that being a person, being like, a man, a physical sentient ape creature or whatever, is like the high point of being. And our only desire is to get the way the fuck back to our primordial being. It's why he talks about microbes and this shit all the time. It's why he thinks that the will, as he calls it, is substantiated in organic matter by being made completely unconscious. When desire is this sort of pushing forward of attempting to get stuff, become stuff, exhaust itself, as he puts it. Overall, what Spare wants to try to impart to you is this idea that not only God, but everything that you experience and deal with in existence is in this sort of background primordial consciousness that your average, everyday, normal consciousness has to express in dualistic terms. And that the reason that things happen to you and you do stuff is you have these sort of ingrained beliefs and desires that are all clogging you up all the time. They're so contradictory and against each other that they cause everything from illness and disease to whatever, the existential condition of man. And you get around that by this process of self-love. All that said, let's hear what he has to say about other religions, because he might have something nice to say about them, right?
Sure. He's nah, but the Muslims are fine. Just in bold, like just small fine print down at the bottom of the page. So yeah, but Muslims are. Where he's like, oh man, those Jains, they just like brush the floor as they're walking by so they don't crush any bugs. Pretty dope. Nice guys.
Some praise the idea of faith. To believe that they are gods or anything else would make them such proving by all they do to be full of its non-belief. Better it is to admit incapacity or insignificance than rejoice it by faith. And since the superficial protects but does not change the vital, therefore reject the former for the latter. Their formula is deception, and they are deceived, the negation of their purpose. Faith is denial, or the metaphor idiocy, hence it always fails. To make their bondage more secure, governments force religions down the throats of their slaves, and it always succeeds. Those who escape it are few, therefore their honor is greater. When faith perishes, the self shall come into its own. Others, less foolish, obscure the memory that God is a conception of themselves and as much subject to law. Then this ambition of faith, is it so desirable? Myself, I have not yet seen a man who is not God already. Others, again, and those who have much knowledge, cannot tell you what exactly belief is, or how to believe in what defies natural laws and existing belief. Surely it is not by saying, I believe. That art long been lost. They are even more subject to the bewilderment and distraction directly they open their mouths full of argument, without power and unhappy unless spreading their own confusion to gain cogency. They must adopt dogma and mannerism that excludes possibility.
Mic drop. No,
Yeah.
that's a mic drop, dude.
Yeah.
It's like every single chaos magician, please go back and listen to that part again.
Yeah. Surely it's not by saying, I believe.
I believe. That art long lost.
Yeah, and he's saying that he's decrying faith, and he's decrying any sort of fake it till you make it mentality.
Yeah, he say, how do you believe something that goes against your previous beliefs? How do you
How
believe
could
something
you?
that defies the natural laws? And I suppose what he means by natural laws is the things that are observable and understood.
Law is something that he talks about a lot in this book as well, and it seems to be, as best as I can put together, what he's talking about before, the bondage of how existence works based on our conception and this unconscious background that we're putting things into when we're doing sigils. He talks about Kia's law, and Kia's law is self-love. So,
Right.
if anything, that's why it seems to go back to this highest principle, is this state of non-duality that is, again, a mental state or mood, as he puts it. In the next part, Be Ye Mystic, this is where he takes the various magic people to task. Others believe in prayer, have not all yet learned that to be that. Bleh. Others believe in prayer, have not all yet learned that to ask is. I feel like this is misspelled. Anyway, it says ask it to be denied. I think it's supposed to say to ask is to be denied.
Okay.
Let it be the root of your gospel. O ye who are living other people's lives, unless desire is subconscious, it is not fulfilled. No, not in this life. Then verily sleep is better than praying. Quiescence is hidden desire, a form of not asking. By it, the female obtains much from the man. That's what I'm talking about when he's saying like some incel-y shit. But of course, he doesn't mean women exactly, but other places it sounds a little bit more like it. Utilize prayer, if you must pray, as a means of exhaustion, and by that you will obtain your desire. There we go. That's a very plain reading of the technique he's trying to give you here. The goal is to find ways to exhaust your desires so that your conscious mind can't deal with this and not obsess over it.
It's almost akin to the repeating a word until it loses its meaning.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's These are all sorts of things that Spare might get on with, but Spare's actual things that he tells you to do are very specific, and it's the very simple two things that we already know. Some do much to show the similarity of different religions. Certainly by it, I prove the possibility of a fundamental illusion, but that they never realize, or this ukase, they are the mockery for how much they regret. They suffer more conflict than the unenlightened. This is basically him just saying that religions are all crap. They all have the same basic problem. Surely then, for the attainment of the transcendental, God and religion should have no place. Some praise truth, so-called, but give it many containers. Forgetting its dependence, they prove its relationship in paradox. The songs of experience and illusion. Paradox is not truth, but the truth that anything can be true for a time. There you go. That's sort of the nothing is true, everything permitted edge of Spare is. Spare has a concept of truth that is very pragmatic, in that all things can be true because everything is manifest and made reality via a cognitive but unrecognizable subconscious practice.
Anything can be true for a time.
Self-love only cannot be denied, and it is self-love as much when paradoxical under any condition. Hence, it alone is truth without accessories complete. That's what it always comes back to, is that there is
ultimate reality.
Ultimate reality is a non-dual
Dharmakaya, that sort of thing.
Yep. Others praise ceremonial magic and are supposed
Here
to
it
suffer
comes.
must ecstasy. Our asylums are crowded and the stage is overrun. Is it by symbolizing we become the symbolized? Were I to crown myself king, should I be king? Rather, I should be an object of disgust or pity. These magicians, who insincerity is their safety, are but the unemployed dandies of the brothels. Magic is but one's natural ability to attract without asking. Ceremony, what is unaffected. Its doctrine, the negation of theirs. I know them well in their creed of learning that teaches the fear of their own light. Vampires, they are the very lice in attraction. Their practices prove their incapacity. They have no magic to intensify the normal, the joy of a child or healthy person, none to evoke their pleasure or wisdom from themselves, their methods depending on a morass of the imagination and a chaos of conditions, their knowledge obtained with less decency than the hyena his food. I say they are less free and do not obtain the satisfaction of the meanest among animals, self-condemned in their disgusting fatness, their emptiness of power, without even the magic of personal charm or beauty. They are offensive to their bad taste and mongering for advertisement. The freedom of energy is not obtained by its bondage, great power not by disintegration. It is not because our energy parentheses or mind stuff is already overbound and divided that we are not capable, let alone magical. That overall was a takedown of ceremonial magic and virtually any sort of magical practice you could think of that would be symbolic or involve the conscious mind at all. That is what Spare is telling you, saying that none of that shit works. It doesn't matter if you believe in it. It
And
doesn't
he'd
matter.
say that, and it going to the point of saying, like, you can look at the people that do ceremonial magic for all the proof you need that it doesn't do anything.
Yep, that is
He's
exactly
saying,
what
look at these, like, these people are not charming. They have no personal power of their own.
they're not creative enough to even do this sort of thing anyway.
They're not capable of it. This, that, and the other. It's like it is definitely a takedown of, like, look at all, like, these are a bunch of dorks.
And you notice that again in his theory of magic, it's entirely against ceremonial magic because it's an idea of conceiving symbolic relations and having conceptual ideas of how things work and performing actions in relation to that. He's completely against that. That's why that last quote, is it not because our energy parentheses or mind stuff is already overbound and divided that we are not capable, let alone magical. He's saying that, learning a bunch of Kabbalah and learning a bunch of astrology and waving around swords and stuff is not going to help you. None of that is going to make you be able to do magic.
You're giving yourself more conceptions and more ideas and rules and patterns or whatever that you are going to divide yourself up in and split yourself in multiple directions that you cannot become the singular focus that allows for the manifestation of your desire to get without asking to even this is where we keep talking about like the Tao, where it's like we act without doing and everything gets done.
And more importantly, anything for Spare that is about dealing with your conscious desires or what you want in the moment and being like, I want to do
it requires a negation of or an exhaustion of the desire to the point that it's lost.
Yeah,
which also comes up in chaos magic.
And just in case you were curious of Spare's thoughts on the symbolic in general, we have this next one where some believe any and everything is symbolic and can be transcribed and explain the occult but of what they do not know, great spiritual truths. So argument a metaphor, cautiously confusing the obvious, which develops the hidden virtue. This unnecessary corpulency, however impressive, is it not disgusting? The elephant is exceedingly large, but extremely powerful. The swine, though odious, does not breed the contempt of our good taste. If a man is no hero to his servant, much less he can remain a mystic in the eyes of the curious. Similarity educates mimicry. Decorate your meanings, however objectionable, as fact, after you have shown your honesty. Truth, though simple, never needs the argument of confusion for obscurity. Its own pure symbolism embraces all possibilities as mystic design. Take your stand in common sense and you include the truth which cannot lie. No argument has yet prevailed. Perfect proportion suggests no alteration, and what is useless decays. They reject all the modern symbolism and reach an absurd limit very early, not counting on change and at times the arbitrary nature of symbolism or the chance of a preserved folly by their adoption of the traditional without a science, as having reading to the present, their symbolism is chaotic and meaningless. Not knowing the early renderings, they succeed in projecting their own meagerness by this confusion as explaining the ancient symbols. Children are more wise. Long story short there, that's Spare basically telling you that any attempt to understand the world through symbolism is a complete misapprehension. No one really knows what the hell they're talking about.
Well, I think what he says is that it's a failure, especially of traditional, is like when people go back to the old world symbols and try to understand them in a modern context, he's like, without acknowledging that symbols are arbitrary and subject to change. And I think on another level, it reminds me of the quote from, I think it's from the book, If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. But it says something to the effect of, just when you will have these profound, deep inner experiences, but you will always come to the same conclusion that there is nothing in the world there's no great truth in the world that isn't obvious to the rest of us. And I think that's what Spare is actually getting at here. It's like the truth of the world is it's common. It's obvious. It's there if you're willing to throw away the conceptions that you're carrying around and sort of the junk and the bad ideas. If you would throw them away and to be as like these children, you can see the obvious.
Right. Yeah. And there's just a very general sense in which he's saying that, because the notice of they reject modern symbolism too.
Yeah.
It's sort of this idea of like, what if you truly understand how symbolism works, for Spare at least, he's like, you'll know that it's not a logical, consistent means of attributing meaning. It's something much deeper than that.
Yeah. All right. What else you got?
I made the comment about the definition of Kia he uses later on. That's very long. Undifferentiated I, quantum, by its exuberance we have gained existence. That sort of thing. It's a lot to take on.
The formless that is the giver of form.
Yeah. It's simultaneously all of the self, but it's not the self. It's outside of time, but the idea of pleasure and self-love, the primordial sexual principle, but not intelligence. Very metaphysical sort of thing that you can kind of get a taste for, but it's harder to give actual definition. This is the part I was talking about where he mentions the law. The law of Kia is its own arbiter beyond necessitation. Who can grasp the nameless Kia? Obvious but unintelligible, without form, its design most excellent. Its wish is its superabundance. Who can assert its mysterious purpose? There's a general sense in which Spare thinks Kia is doing is that it's constantly recreating and pushing itself, but somehow it's not the evolutionary principle, because he has this idea of evolution is based on the inability for desire to be properly quenched and dealt with. So it feeds on organically and constant manifestation. But he makes a point of saying that that's not Kia, which I think is interesting, given what Carol will later have to say.
Mm-hmm.
He has stuff to say about science as well. What is this? Science is the accursed doubt of the possible, yea, of what does exist. You cannot conceive an impossibility. Nothing is impossible. You are the impossible. Doubt is delay. Time, but how it punishes. Nothing is more true than anything else. What are you not? You ever answered truthfully. You tyrannize over yourself. So constantly forget what you remember.
Okay, and then we go, that's sort of back to the idea of the world that as we apprehend it is not the totality of things. So science in and of itself is in attempting to carve out what is reality and how it works cannot conceive of the negatives. It cannot conceive of the negation. It cannot conceive of something that is impossible. All kind of box standard. I'm not, those aren't like flip the table sort of statements.
I want to touch on quickly the concept of the neither.
Okay.
Here, I'm going to read the whole thing on the death posture real quick because it's only one page. Sound good? Ideas of self and conflict cannot be slain by resistance. They are a reality. No death or cunning has overcome them, but is their reinforcement of energy. The dead are born again and again and lie in the womb of consciousness. By allowing maturity is to predicate decay by their non-resistance and retrogression to the early simplicity and the passage of the original and unity without idea. From that idea is the formula of non-resistance germinating. Does not matter. Please yourself. The conception of I am not must of necessity follow the conception of I am because of its grammar. As surely in this world of sorrow, night follows day. The recognition of pain as such implies the idea of pleasure, and so with all ideas. But this duality, let him remember to laugh at all times, recognize all things, resist nothing. Then there is no conflict, incompatibility, or compulsion as such. And there you go. That's the ultimate technique that Spare's been trying to get you this entire time. It's a non-dual moment of mental cognition brought about by the understanding of dualistic relations.
There can be no quality that does not imply its opposite.
by recognizing and identifying with that, you can get into this sort of state. This is what he's going to talk about right here in the neither neither. Man implies woman, I transcend thee by the hermaphrodite. This again implies a eunuch. All these conditions I can transcend by a neither principle. Yet, although a neither is vague, the fact of conceiving it proves its palpability and again implies a different neither. But the neither neither principle of these two, in the state where the mind has passed beyond conception, it cannot be balanced, since it implies only itself. The I principle, which has been reached, the does not matter, need not be state, and it is not related to form. Save and beyond it, there is no other. Therefore, it alone is complete and eternal, indestructible. It has the power to destroy. Therefore, it alone is true freedom and existence. So there you go. That's the clearest we'll get about what this state is about and Spare's non-dual ideas and how you're supposed to reach them. It's a cognitive phenomena based in the exhaustion of mental desires, and any other sort of prescribed methods given seem to be on the basis of utility. Like there's descriptions of the death posture as like a what is it? It's like a tension of the arms and stretching of the legs and such.
And if I remember correctly, he almost describes these exercises as preliminaries to get you to the death posture.
Oh, right. Yes. Because this is where he talks about staring in a mirror until you don't recognize the face looking back at you anymore.
Yeah. I think
that's in this book.
Yeah. Yeah. The conception of like a visualization in the body and of it moving up the spine sort of thing, and then out from the head, and then completely losing everything to try to get to that. You know, those are just visual exercises to get you to the neither neither death posture sort of state. So do we want to wrap up the book of pleasure by just talking about real quick the two exercises? One everybody knows already, but the other one is a little more,
Yep, exactly.
a little less talked about.
Yeah.
So the first one, you can did you guys know that if you take like a desire, like something you want to happen, and then like mess with the letters and stick them together, this makes something called a sigil. Like that's neat, right? It's like a magic symbol, and the idea is that you obfuscate what the intent was by making it like a picture that you can hold in your mind, and then by getting that to slip past your conscious brain, you can make magic happen. Now I know that's really crazy, and you guys probably haven't heard of it, but like I don't think anybody talks about that. That's pretty heavy stuff. But that came from Spare. So, but you probably already knew that.
Here's the difference between what Spare is talking about and what I think most people conceive of as sigil making, right? Like the examples he gives are always weird ass shit, right? They're never like the practical sort of things that people do sigils for. Like I want to have a dream that gives me my holy guardian angel, or I want to find $20, or I want to get a girlfriend. What Spare writes is shit like I want the strength of a tiger, or God is love.
Right.
So Spare already has sort of I mean, maybe he's just doing it because he's giving you examples.
Now, that does also wrap into his notions of atavistic resurgence, which I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about. Even when we get to Kenneth Grant, I'm not going to do a whole lot. But it's the notion of you can tap into like your previous evolutionary and reincarnated states of being, right?
Yeah, well, I mean,
so you can tap into the strength of an animal, or the karma of a cat is another one that he supposedly used that was effective and things like that. So,
well, here I'll read one sentence that'll give you what you're talking about there. Know the subconscious to be an epitome of all experience and wisdom, past incarnations as men, animals, birds, vegetable life, etc., etc. Everything that exists has and ever will exist, each being a stratum in the order of evolution. So there you go. And as we've touched on earlier, Spare seems to have this kind of idea or general implication, the spearhead of the evolutionary chain, man's goal and desire to get back to
the primordial.
He gives you a list of things you can do, and it's kind of interesting. First, all consciousness except of the sigil has to be annulled. Do not confuse this with concentration. You will simply conceive the sigil any moment you begin to think. Vacuity is obtained by exhausting the mind and body by some means or another. A personal or traditional means serves equally well depending on temperament. Choose the most pleasant. These should be held in favor. Mantras and posture, women and wine, tennis and the playing of patience, or by walking and concentration on the sigil. None is necessary to him who has, even symbolically, for a moment by the neither conquered the dual principle, conception. His ego is free from gravity. If the sigil is made an obsession by continual apprehension, its realization may happen at any moment in the form of inspiration. This is done by reverting the mind to the sigil. Then, when one is extremely worried, the time of exhaustion is the time of fulfillment. At the time of exhaustion or vacuity, retain only and visualize the symbol form. Eventually, it becomes vague, then vanishes, and success is assured. It's telling you to do all the basic sort of things, like just, get yourself exhausted, get yourself to the point where you're about to break off. And then when you do, visualize the sigil and let it go. But he says this down in a footnote. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long. I mentioned the most simple. There is no need for crucifixion. Drugs are useless. Smoking and laziness, the more difficult. So everyone getting high and firing off a sigil, you're doing it wrong, according to Spare.
Well, you'll notice Peter Carroll also mentioned drugs as not a very effective way to get to gnosis. Small doses, rigorous focus, knowing what you're doing with it, and that sort of thing. All I'm going to say is that that's a commonality with pretty much most occultists, I think, is that they're going to tell you, it's like, yeah, drugs are not a shortcut to any kind of magical or mystical attainment. They can be useful in the right setting with the right mindset for certain people. Just don't smoke opium and try to fire off a sigil.
Yeah.
Bad time.
I like that he says tennis. That's a fun one.
Well, losing yourself in in something like a physical activity is probably very effective.
Of
Actually,
course.
I don't say probably. It is very effective. I've done it.
Well, and of course, the thing that we point out again is that he says none of that's necessary if you've even like kind of gotten a grasp of what the neither principle is and how that, which comes back to what we're talking about here. And when we get to chaos magic, we'll mention a couple more things that will be important in relation to that. And the second one,
I'll give you the short version because we're already so deep in this. Automatic drawing is obtained by the sigil formula simplified. First, make the desire to draw organic and as a means of acquiring subconscious activity pictorially expressed. It is the easiest of psychic phenomenon. The hand has to be trained from one of the accustomed practices to work freely and of itself. Exercise making these and other simple forms swiftly and continuously. And he shows like little squiggles. Spare was a huge proponent of automatic drawing just in general. And he describes he describes the thumb meditation where you just do this hyper focus and he just shows these drawings on basically meditating on something like your thumb, meditating on an object and doing these drawings and seeing that. He also shows these little things of like, just figure out how to do these little squiggles. And he even shows like the pattern of the squiggles and stuff like that by just allowing things to channel through you on allowing the unconscious to manifest itself through these little nothing sort of movements of a pen. You will find means to tap into that creative process. And it gets a little wonkier because Grant will go on to claim that Spare chalked up like all of his automatic drawings, not to like an unconscious or something like that. He says it was like, no, he was like channeling paranormal intelligences and stuff. The black eagle gets brought up. That we'll get into the weeds on that. But that was another one that it's interesting that the two things he mentions, like the sigil process and then like automatic drawings, which by their nature are supposed to be this entire, like it is attempting to allow the unconscious to manifest through a pseudo conscious act of just letting yourself go with it until it produces stuff. He literally describes it as the easiest of psychic phenomena. And he said, when you get the hand to be able to move organically, he says, practice making these little squiggles, which is a very direct thing. But he says you can give way to subconscious expression through this. And it's like, so it was important enough that he felt the need to put it in this book. So there you go. And when you look at a lot of his more bizarre work, you can see it's like, oh, I understand where these weird shapes and things came from. And I've always heard the argument that like even automatic drawings are never purely an unconscious versus conscious exercise, but so there's the balancing and in between state. But it produced, for him at least, produced this immaculate art that has a lot of spooky vibes, guys. For him, art and magic were joined at the hip, like a lot of people, but in a very direct way for him.
To wrap up on this one, because the next couple will actually be a much shorter experience for everybody, but we could go on and talk about this forever because he does actually give some more techniques, as it were. He's constantly presenting ideas of opposites and unity in terms of sexuality. He's got a definition of magic, which we don't have time to get into because it's completely Spareian. Like this is a magic definition that doesn't work for anyone but Spare. He makes a distinction between true belief and like conscious apprehended belief, which is kind of what we've been getting at this entire time. That he equates the subconscious with karma and the generality of the subconscious being a sort of not like a Jungian collective unconscious, but like a creative evolutionary repository of everything that we've already mentioned before, and how that directs that directs necessity, as he constantly calls it. And
right,
in a way it does point towards this idea that Spare has a very deterministic and organic view of existence that is short-circuited and able to be controlled by getting to the primordial Kia via whatever these mental states and putting the various beliefs into the subconscious via sigils. That about wrap it up there?
For me, yeah, I think so.
So his next two works are, if you thought those were opaque and and hard to get through with not a lot of direct practical know-how, then buckle up, because the next two are just that. He does a work called The Focus of Life, which is, for the most part, it is soliloquies and dialogues between different entities that he may or may not have mentioned before. It opens with a Kia speaking unto Zeus, and then Zeus speaks unto Akia, and then Akia Zod, and all Aos appears, which is AAOS, who seems to be Spare, but this is really not it professes more of the ideas that Spare has already elaborated on before, but for the most part, it's sort of a mythical, dreamlike venture of Spare to discuss more of his ideas. He talks about the ideas of incarnating into women. He talks about the rebirth and returning of all things. He says there is one sense, sexuality, and one desire, procreation. He speaks of how the will must be made unconscious and desire must be made unconscious for it to manifest. Like I said, it's just very similar ideas and a shifting cast of characters. This is where we get a lot of the stuff I was talking about before. There seems to be this constant thing where Aos is talking about how he has to give up women and how he doesn't love them and he doesn't want them, which is just like, I understand it's got a mythical and psychological sort of component to it, but it does very much sound like, nah, dude, I'm just gonna focus on my drawings and I don't gonna worry about girls.
You got to save your seed, bro.
Yeah.
You got to save your seed, man. Dude, they're gonna try to take it. No, you got to be a wizard. Live in a house with a bunch of cats. Don't let them take your seed.
There's only one section I actually want to like read, just because it feels relevant to talking about chaos magic later, and it's also very short compared to the rest of this stuff.
All right.
This is called Self-Love and Map Making. Eos in his youth had many dreams, pleasing and otherwise, awake and in his sleep. Frequently, fragments of dreams haunted him for many a day, but they were of his marriage bed. After his divorce, he slept alone with his sword. Eos once dreamed he was asleep. Oh my god. And he fucking writes like this. Eos once dreamed he was
read like
asleep,
that.
and this was his dream. He had been exploring an unknown country, and having returned, was busy making maps from his rough sketches and memoranda. He was surprised by how fresh was his memory and every questioned detail, at the ease with which his hand drew the mountains and the contours of that unknown country. His dexterity became too pleasing and threatened an event long ceased and then forgotten. By his determination, he awoke and was able to calm his excited passion. He was consoled that nothing had happened. He then spoke to himself thus: "What new deceit is this? Must I be forever solving the changing symbolism of the wretched morality called I? Do I still need a loincloth for my passions? Verily, to be alone in map drawing is now an unsafe art. Sleep, the sexual excitement still obtains. Procreation is with more things than women. The function of the sexuality is not entirely procreation. Stranger experiences than ever imagination conceived. One must retain to give birth to will. Behold, myself love thee, I pleasure too well to let slip into other being.
Gotta save your seed, bro.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Well,
hearing.
it might be incorrect, but there's a quote about how the people who create religions are the ones who benefit from them. And it seems to be Spare telling you not to make fancy systems, not to make not to make maps, which it kind of goes against a lot of what chaos magic is talking about later. But that was the one thing that I felt super relevant. The rest of it is sort of an exploration of Spare's overall magico philosophical system, which is exactly what the last one that we come to is Anathema of Zeus. It's called the Sermon to the Hypocrite, and it's just a screed against British society in particular, but society at large. And it's nothing new. It's just Spare reiterating his ideas of hating conventionality, normativity, normal people, how people are they don't understand desire, they don't understand the subconscious, just Spare repeating himself ad nauseum with philosophical backing. It's really fascinating stuff, but it's not anything that we're not going to get out of the various screeds we've gone already with the Book of Pleasure, which is why I wanted to spend so much time on that one.
Right. And then there's the Logomassy of Zeus, which is just a collection of like aphorisms and sayings. The only attribute of man is God, or vice versa.
Superman died with pantheism. Since then, we have only invalids and salvationists. You know what I mean? Aesthetics are a reality, more permanent possibilities of sensations. This is one of his works after meeting up with Grant. And the last one we have to talk about is the Zoetic Grimoire of Zeus, which is the clearest we'll get of any particular things that Spare does. And I'm not going to read it because it's just me giving you a lesson on how to do various types of magic things with this general principle that Spare has laid out.
So that's, as a whole, that's his work. It's like he wasn't Crowley in that, like, Crowley wrote tons, he wrote essays and articles and 4 dozen books, and all of his letters get thrown around. Like, he was incredibly prolific compared to Spare, who much more prolific on the art front, but he didn't write a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things that were published after his death as well that expands it a bit more, but not nearly to the corpus of someone like Crowley or a Blavatsky or even a Peter Carroll.
What that leaves us is the works published after his death, notably things that were incorporated into Kenneth Grant. Now, we're not going to talk about Zeus Speaks, but it's notable in the final chapter of Cults of the Shadow by Kenneth Grant. There's the chapter The Sorceries of Zeus, which he makes mention of a unpublished manuscript which got put out later. And there's the Book of the Living Word of Zeus, and then the Zoetic Grimoire that got mentioned, like I said, Zeus Speaks. But just in the back here, there's a very interesting excerpt that is Spare laying out things maybe a little more foundational, or at least emphasizing something that I think is very interesting. And we've touched on it a little bit, but it really does lay it out. This is the Affirmation Creed of Zeus Vel Thanatos. I believe in the flesh as now and forever. For I am the light, the truth, the law, the way, and none shall come unto anything except through his flesh. Did I not show you the eclectic path between ecstasies, that precarious funambulatory way? But you, who had no courage, was tired and feared. Then awake, dehypnotize yourself from the poor reality you be-live and be-lie. Ha. From the great noontide is here, the great bell is struck, let others involuntary emulation, the forced redemption so certain for many apostates to life. Now in this day, I ask you to search your memories, for great unities are near. The inceptor of all memory is your soul. Life is desire, death its reformation. I am the resurrection, I who transcend ecstasy by ecstasy. Meditating need not be in self-love. The creed is informed by the dynamism of Spare's will and his great ability as an artist, created a cult on the astral plane, and this is where we get hokey.
I'm sorry, we haven't been hokey this entire episode.
He referred to it as Zos Kia Cultus, which I don't think and that's the thing, I don't want to say anybody's lying, especially because, like, Grant was his homie, but from nothing in his works called it that. It's only afterwards. But he lists these things as our sacred book, the book of pleasure, our path, the eclectic path between ecstasies, our deity, the all-prevailing woman, which is, again, that's what I'm talking about, where Grant took other people's works and really fit them into this this sexual magic current that he says is the bedrock of all magical tradition, which is just historically incorrect. There's a lot of useful stuff in it, but like I said, historically not accurate. Sorry. Our creed, and here's the interesting part, the living flesh, Zeus. Again, I say, this is your great moment of reality, the living flesh. And then also our law, to trespass all laws. So it's laying out this, and we can argue to what extent Grant is shifting things and sort of spelling out something that maybe Spare wasn't trying to actually spell out. But I do think the fact that chaos magic, one, nobody really talks about Kia anymore in chaos magic anyway, but even in the foundational stuff like Liber Null, Kia gets mentioned. Zeus does not get mentioned.
Well,
at all.
the Zeus Key occultist does.
Yeah, but he never mentions Zeus as in like the physical living flesh, the embodiment that is the now and forever moment of reality. And that's what Spare is getting at right in the beginning of like Earth Inferno, where it's like the embodiment that you are in that is all you will ever have, in a sense, at least. And that the idea is that even that while there is this ever-present moment that you're able to reach out to, and there is this grand transcendent Kia, but they are bound up together. And I bring that up because when we talk about like the book that we're getting, we keep bringing up the notion of embodiment as the focal point of all magic practice.
He has very particular ideas about identification and the flesh and body, which really remind me a lot of like Merleau-Ponty talking about the flesh, or if nothing else, in the sense of we use the term appropriation a lot when we're discussing the body. We use the metaphor of like, oh, the blind person with a cane. The cane becomes part of their body, and Spare has a lot of that going on there, and as you would in the
and we could be just as guilty as Grant of like reading something and then putting our own ideas into it.
Oh yes, no, 100%, not arguing that, but Spare does talk a lot about the flesh, about incarnation, and he separates it from Kia in a sense, and it's not the same sort of mind-body dualism that we see in a lot of occultism.
There's the notion here that he's throwing down that you will not know Kia except through this ever-present flesh, this moment of reality that you have, your Zeus. I find that piece very interesting. That there is a lot to think about there, because especially we're so busy warring against the all mental schools of magic, of everything's mind and everything's just what you're perceiving, and it's like, nah, dude, there's something right here.
Yeah. Well, do you have anything else interesting from the Grant perspective on Spare?
Yeah, well, this is what I'm talking. I wanted to get into some of the hokiness, because again, I don't want to accuse anybody of lying or making things up, but it's interesting because Grant throws out stuff like of Spare saying that he met some witch lady who her name was Mrs. Peterson. I forgot that. I found it. Mrs. Peterson, when he was young, basically like initiated him into the old England witch cult, which like might be the source of like his early occult ideas. But that actually gets into like Don Juan.
Yeah.
That gets into like mysterious magic benefactor.
The long tradition of somebody who's probably made up teaching you how to do
magic. But like he doesn't talk about that. He doesn't bring that up in any of these. And also,
well, in the Zoetic grimoires, he says he was told by a witch. Yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. After
he met Grant. So like, I don't know. I just don't know. But that's when it's only post Grant that we get mentions of like the black eagle that is supposed like the guide and familiar spirit that directed a lot of Spare's spiritual communications. And this is when I talk about,
well, that said, the black eagle does appear in Earth Inferno. So
it does. Okay,
it's just an image inside of a wheel, but it's there.
Okay. So it's like, this might just be something he never talked about until he got on with Grant, but it's like,
it is interesting to note that, as we said, once he meets Grant, and he puts out some new works. They are a lot more technical, at least the Zoetic Grimoire is.
Yeah, talking about the White Sabbath as first told me by a witch, which is all like sexual magic and stuff, and talking about sexual polarities. It's very interesting to see, like I said, the post Grant works that come out, and I'm curious of what level of like how much did they rub off on each other? I suppose it's like, Grant Spare's influence on Grant is undeniable, but then you wonder how much was Grant's influence on Spare.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't think there's anything that isn't nascent in his earlier works that we find in the later works more formalized a bit. Well, the guy, he spent a whole scree talking about how he was staying away from women and lying in his bed with his sword. And then in the beginning of the Zoetic Grimoire, he's like, sex orgies for the purpose of materialization, which sounds a lot more ninth degree OTO type shit than anything Spare wrote before. I mean, he did talk about the use of union and sexuality constantly, but you get the feeling that it's a lot less hey, let's everyone, we're gonna get laid.
Yeah. The one other interesting thing, Cults of the Shadow, talking about the sorceries of Zeus and stuff, but it describes particular symbolic relations of the sort of neither new sexuality and so key cultist sex magic type stuff. But it brings up a particular symbolism of this dual cross that's associated with crossroads, crucifixions. The 8 directions of space, typified by the yantra of the black goddess Kali, the cross of the 4 quarters, plus the in-betweenist concepts that together compose the 8-fold cross, the 8-petaled lotus, a synthetic symbol of the goddess of the 7 stars plus her son. So it was funny to me that it's like, oh, it's Chaos Star. You're talking
it's a
8 directional Chaos Star associated. So now we've got like, okay, here's Grant associating it with the Chaos Star, the 8 directional cross, whatever you want to call it. So now we've got Zeus Key Occultist 8 directional thing, and it's like, oh, it's the stage is set. It's all right there. And I'm not even sure, because I'd have to double check my dates, but I'm trying to remember when that like when did Liber Null get published versus this. It's like, it's all right there. It's a funny thing of like, how the hell did the Chaos Star end up there in the Chaos Magic, somebody writing about the Chaos Magic progenitor?
Yeah,
Liber Null was
funny.
like the 70s, right? Liber Null was
yeah,
like
the
late
earliest
70s.
ones are like 70 something, same about,
And then-
not that far off from when Grant's really starting to write,
75. Ah, man. So they're like right there. But then, like, if I remember right, don't they explicitly say it's like, yeah, we got that from Michael Moorcock, right?
I'm pretty sure.
So it's like, man, no. The self-propagating symbol of like,
We're
just
just-
universally, everybody had to somehow, all of this had to become wrapped up.
The truth of
With,
memetics is that we're all just very unoriginal.
Now that we've gotten through the ordeal of just trying to talk about the man's works and like what the hell they mean,
Yeah.
do we want to discuss a little bit about like chaos magic and how in a lot of this stuff is things people probably already know. Like Liber Null describes the process of Kia as the formless life energy current, whatever, that is the builder or assembler of the reality around the magician, that the thing that interacts with the aethers to reach into chaos, which is synonymous with the Tao. So now like those are concepts that get repeated. The idea of the vacuous state gets cobbled into the concept of gnosis. Sigils get brought up, all that sort of stuff. But it tries to re-square it. While Spare is like, nah, ceremonial magic is dumb as fuck. Peter Carroll is like, well, ceremonial magic has to work in the idea that through the ritual, the mind is able to attain that vacuous state through occupying of the conscious mind, so that the unconscious is able to bring Kia to manifestation for the purposes of enacting will.
Right, which again goes entirely against what Spare is saying. Like Spare is
'cause-
not on board with that at all.
Well, because Spare doesn't conceive of Kia as a personal Like it can manifest through, like I said, almost through
Well, Spare doesn't
degrees.
think a personal exists. That's his whole bag on the self, is that self is like a singular unity that's a totality of all living and non-living things that manifest out of Kia by necessity and karma, as it were. And if that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, it's because it kind of is, but that's what I'm getting at. It's like what Spare has a non-personal, non-dualistic understanding of existence where it contains all possibilities. And that is Kia. That is the Tao sort of not, you can't speak of it type of thing. It's a lot like Heidegger when he says being, you know? And that's not what Carol's talking about at all. Carol, if anything, that's chaos for Carol.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Kia seems to be almost indicative of a personal force. He says the envelope by which all these processes are held together is Kia.
Well, doesn't he say that Kia is like the spark of chaos that exists in all things?
Yeah, something akin to that, where it's almost like he's almost creating a demarcation between the personal and the transpersonal, of like chaos being the capital T thing and Kia being like the smaller, somewhat individualistic manifestation of it.
Right, yeah, like here we go. Check it out. Yet there is a part of man which is of a singular nature, although the mind is unable to perceive it as such. Man considers himself a center of will and a center of perception. Will and perception are not separate, but only appear so to the mind. The unity which appears to the mind to exert the twin functions of will and perception is called Kia by magicians. Sometimes it is called the spirit or soul or life force instead. Kia cannot be experienced directly because it is the basis of consciousness or experience, and it has no fixed qualities which the mind can latch onto. Kia is the consciousness. It is the elusive I which confers self-awareness, but does not seem to consist of anything itself. That's pretty close to what
It's
kind of
definitely
close to what Spare is trying to say, but it's way more. It's already putting it at odds with this idea of it being a personal life force element. Like, I can't remember what, doesn't he say something about all complexity comes out of chaos?
Yeah. But and it's notable because he's equating it to the soul and things like that, which it's like you're already ascribing qualities to it by the mains of that. And I'm not trying to do this as like a pointing out, oh, Carol got it wrong. I'm saying that Carol's interpretation, because it does illustrate how complicated stuff like this is, especially when you're trying to simplify it into practical uses, or you're going to find interpretations that do not align with your takeaway from reading it. I mean, there's probably tons of people that have listened to us and going to, oh, you guys have got this all fucking wrong as well.
Right, but I guess that's sort of the point, is that we're pointing out that Spare is not like a systematic writer. He's not giving you something that is solid enough that it can't be misinterpreted. Like, you know, if I go to you and say, Aleister Crowley thought that the dagger was representative of fire and the will, that is something you can say factually is wrong.
Point blank, incorrect, like, fuck off, yeah.
Whereas when I say, whereas when Carol says, chaos is also the force which adds increasing complexity to the universe by spawning structures which were not inherent in its component parts. It is the force which has caused life to evolve itself out of dust and is currently most concentratedly manifest in the human life force, or Kia, where it is the source of consciousness. Now, I can say, because we've already noted in the Book of Pleasure that Spare actively says that Kia is not the source of evolution, and that Kia, if we're implying that he's implying that Kia comes out of chaos, or that it is most concentrated within Kia. That seems completely at odds with Spare's sort of totalizing sense that Kia is all things in their undifferentiated form. But that's an interpretation that I'm sure people can argue.
And that's a much more splitting hairs sort of thing, of not because that makes it sound like it doesn't matter, but like it's a much more in the weeds type of argument. It's the sort of discussion that people can disagree and then all sort of walk away not being like, oh, that person's a fucking idiot, they're just absolutely wrong. These are things where it's like there is a level of vagary that begs that makes you have to fill in the blanks to some extent. It's not nearly as, like you said, systematized. It's not even, I think by the end of it with Kenneth Grant, it's a lot closer, but.
Right, but it's a lot closer to a solid system, but it's also one that shows the increasing divergence of the earlier writings and what everyone else would take from them. Because if you look at like what Spare says in the Book of Pleasure and what he says in like the Zoetic Grimoire, they're not really, one of them feels like a lot more refined, but they're not saying anything completely at odds. Whereas Carol definitely feels like some of this is him changing how he's interpreting these symbols anyway, or changing how he's interpreting these ideas anyway. It's different. It's not the same. And it's why we make the argument that, like, Spare is not like chaos magic. Chaos magic takes a lot from Spare, but they have some things that are completely at odds. Like, it is the mutability of the etheric which has given rise to such a bewildering variety of magical activity and supportive thought forms of all over the universe. The differences, however, are only superficial. When stripped of local symbolism and terminology, all systems show a remarkable uniformity of method. This is because all systems ultimately derive from the tradition of shamanism. Spare is looking at you like you're a complete moron, like you just dribbled all over yourself then. He spent an entire chapter explaining that, oh yeah, there's lots of things that they can have in common and maybe they all things, but I can pretty much show you what they have in common is that they all suck and they're all delusional.
They're all wrong. But actually, in a weird way, it is a sort of akin to the Kenneth Grant thing, where it's like, if you want to work at it, you can reduce all the practices down to, and especially if you're very liberal with your method of interpretation, everything for Kenneth Grant, everything is part of the secret order of sexual magic that relies on the kalas and the fire snake and all that stuff. And it doesn't matter what the tradition actually is, he will find a way to make it fit into that. And then Carol goes like everything goes back to shamanism, which is just relying on altered states of consciousness to make magic happen. It's just it's prevailing paradigms sort of stuff. The other thing is that it's like neither of them took Spare's work and just took it as it was. They fiddled with it.
Spare's influence on chaos magic, even through his reinterpretation by people like Grant, and
overwhelming and undeniable.
Overwhelming and undeniable, but
the man gave us Sigils.
Well, and that's what I was about to say. Like, what has survived out of all of this? I think two things. I think the conception that magic is caused by the attainment of a certain cognitive state, and sigils. Those are the two ideas that have proliferated well beyond chaos magic even. I mean, not to say there's elements of that already, I get, in a certain sense, I guess you could say all of mysticism is predicated on the idea of reaching certain cognitive states that do spooky things.
In a certain level, the bringing in of the notions of like the unconscious and stuff. Crowley did a lot of that too, because he liked psychologists. But the notion of magic having a character of unconscious or subconscious activity that needs to be tapped into is another thing that is still very potent and around. Maybe people don't talk about it in terms like that, but it is things that come. Even whenever somebody talks about the idea of like, I think I unintentionally hexed myself or something like that, or like my unconscious desire to do for this is manifest magically as this. It's like that's not. So I'm not sure Spare would be happy that that's part of his legacy, but I think it does come from that.
I think Spare is really the point where the current trend of like psychologizing a lot of magic.
Oh yeah,
from.
Magic as like psychodrama could probably be derived from a little bit of that.
Yeah, again, I don't think that Spare thinks that's what's happening. I don't think
that. No.
Yeah, right. But that's definitely a lot of where it comes from. Again, in parallel with him and Crowley, those are the two sides of it, right?
Absolutely.
The big ideas for Spare are completely forgotten about. No one, like you said, no one talks about Kia. No one talks about chaos anymore.
Yeah.
We talk about gnosis a lot, which we could equate with the self-love idea, but I don't think people view it. I think what has happened is maybe we'll call it secularizing even, maybe, of this. The idea has been secularized, where it went from, okay, there's only one state that exists in a proper relation to Kia as the non-dual spring of all that is, and the subconscious and so on. And it's been turned into gnosis, which is like literally just a cognitive state. It's like if you can get into it's no different than surprising yourself. You just got to get yourself into that mode, get your brain to do the thing.
But it still works. A lot of the Gnostic, when people do talk about gnosis still these days, they do seem to rely on a lot of the concepts of exhaustion of the desire, of of doing something and working with your conscious mind until it just gives up the ghost. That's in there as far as his lasting impact. But I think
Right.
the concept of those more non-dual notions, the neither, the the concept of self-love and using self-love as a means to activate some kind of sigil. The concept of atavistic resurgence is almost completely like Kenneth Grant talked about it a good bit, but I feel like it's all been like nobody talks about that shit anymore.
In a sense, Spare predicts a lot of ideas of what we're going to care about in magic, and then we make them increasingly utilitarian and secular because his concept of self-love and the greater implications of it gets reduced to putting yourself into a certain mental state so that the sigil can fire off. And that's why we are doomed to a world of jerking off onto squiggles. Ideas like atavistic resurgence, that has been swept up in more of talk about like the Jungian collective unconscious. Even Peter Carroll allegedly, I didn't find this in particular, but someone in an interview said Carroll claimed that Spare was very influenced by Jung in the sense of how the collective unconscious unfolds. And I mean, if he did say that, I think he's completely wrong. And I think it's the reverse. I think that the ideas of atavistic resurgence have been brought up into the more Jungian ideas of the unconscious, which makes sense because that's a place where you can be like, oh, there's wizards and gods and stuff in here, and we can find those in our ancient roots instead of what Spare is talking about, where you must return to microbe.
Yeah, you have to return to the. You know what? This will be really dumb. But Colin Wilson's The Philosopher's Stone. He describes the sort of non-place where the forces of life sprang from, right? And like it creates like gross matter animal beings, but it also creates like the sort of psychic existence of the great old ones. It's a really neat book, honestly. I didn't like it at first, but it's pretty good at parts. In my mind, that's almost the sort of that place of non-being from which the life force and the drive to become something else is something that springs out of this well that is like, the root.
And it's hard to talk about because it is, again, it's a very poetic sort of understanding of things. None of this, what I will give Carroll a lot for, and I give him a lot of shit for it in other places, but he definitely turns these ideas into something that you can point at on a chart and be like, this relates to this way, this relates to this that way.
Things that
and this is how
practical.
You do the things. He makes it incredibly practical. And Spare is not about giving you that. The closest we get to that is the Zoetic Grimoire, and even so, that's a lot more. That's one of those things that I feel like if you hadn't read all the other Spare, it wouldn't come out as clear anyway.
Yeah. What do you think of Spare on a personal level?
I mean, I
He's
like
stinky?
Spare. No,
You said he smelled like cat piss?
I mean, I like
Ew,
Spare.
you smell like cat piss and beer. Yeah, I'm a wizard.
I think
That's really fucked up. Why would you say that about him, man?
Because it's probably true. I mean, honestly, I think Spare is the exact sort of person that makes me constantly remind folks about what magic really is.
It's about being stinky.
Yeah, it's about being stinky and living in a hovel, with cats. No, but seriously, because it's one of those things where when people make the argument about like, if you're such a great wizard, why are you living in a hovel with cats? And you're like, well, why are you? And the way you get around that is you have to look at it in a practical sense about what magic is and what it does and what people want out of life.
I will say that I think I have a weird feeling, and I wasn't there. I don't know, but I'd have a weird feeling that we've probably gone too far with describe. Like we're imagining people people are describing. Oh yeah, he lived in a single room with a hole in the roof with a bucket under it and like 17 cats, and he slept on the floor, and he woke up every day and brushed like we're making it sound like he was basically like a hobo with a wall, and it's like that just wasn't the case. Like, where I think we're overemphasizing. It's like, yeah, he was poor and he was not doing so hot, but like I think maybe we're overemphasizing his level of squalor. I call that just a hunch,
Yeah, I mean,
in the same way that
probably.
people talk about like, oh man, Jack Parsons was a wizard and he got us to all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, Jack Parsons also blew himself up and L. Ron Hubbard stole his wife. you know? So like he did some good. Magic I believe wholeheartedly that his fascination with the occult helped promote certain things that got him to where he was at. But also, they took his money and his girl, and then he dropped that can that said Acme on the side and went boom. You know?
This isn't the Jack Parsons special. Let's get off it. I think ultimately Spare's legacy is one of an incredibly eccentric creator that was uncompromising in his work
And singular.
and magic.
A singular occultist.
A singular occultist, indeed.
Who gave birth to a great multitude of people who would go on to try to repurpose and reinterpret his ideas. Sometimes for the benefit, sometimes to the detriment.
Yeah, and if Kia's purpose was its own superabundance, as he said, then he helped serve that purpose, because what he has created has recreated itself and procreated in a multitude of ways. The infinite ramifications of his work, as it were. The show's already been going on for long enough. Do we have anything? What else do we got to say?
Honestly, I don't think I have anything I can add to this.
That's simultaneously, I feel like, what else can I say? And I could keep talking for hours.
Yeah, this could be, you know what? Yeah, that's actually what I'll agree with you. This could be 5 hours, 6 hours long, but also I'm not sure we'd actually be any closer to anything.
There's one thing I'm going to do just to tempt people who have come in for this and not been a part of the show beforehand. On our Patreon, co-host and I are going to go and do a whole read through of the Zoetic Grimoire.
Oh shit, we are?
Yeah, that's what I decided we're going to do, because it's not that long
right now.
And it gives probably, again, the most practical and down to earth descriptions of, well, I mean, if you can use those words to talk about Austin Osman Spare, but it gives the most straightforward and practical reading of his magic, which might not be the most interesting thing for you, especially if we're to follow what Spare said, and probably, maybe you shouldn't just be going like, ooh, I'm gonna be Austin Osman Spare. I'm gonna be a fucking Kiaist. But we are going to read it over there. So for as little as $5 a month, you can go join us over there and get that and a bunch of other stuff.
All right. Well, that sounds like a fantastic time. And then we'll do a live stream where we do automatic drawings. And, yeah,
these all look like dicks.
They all look like dicks. But no, for everybody that's been listening, we really hope you've enjoyed this dive of two bumbling morons trying to make sense of one of occultism's most influential figures, as complex as it is fundamental. And if you think we're completely wrong about all this shit, go to the comments or get a hold of us on social media at Chaos.
Drag us. Just drag us.
Tell us we ain't shit.
Tell us we've never. Did you just read this? Did you guys even actually read the book? Oh my God. Oh my God. Like, no, we didn't, nerd. Readings for nerds.
Kenneth
I asked ChatGPT to come up with this. All right.
This is a pile of slanderous lies.
All right. Well, with that, this has been Chaos Magic News,
the only podcast that is not actually a podcast. It is a cult on the astral plane. Seem pod cultus.
CM Pod Cultist. If you two would like to remain forever animal, you can go check us out on social media at Chaos Magic News. We're on pretty much everything. We're on the X, we're on the Instagrams, we're on the Facebooks. Blue Sky.
I haven't posted anything because I'm still trying to figure out who fucking stole our name.
Yeah, if you're the one who stole our name on Blue Sky, then get at us. We will give you $2.
I ain't giving you shit. I'm gonna give you a knuckle sandwich. Give me back my name.
If you want more, you can go check out our website, chaosmagicnews.com, where we'll have the occasional article, links to all the other episodes of the pod, links to our prolific interview series that's about to start ramping up again. It's that time of year. It's interview season, folks. So get excited. We got some really great ones coming up.
We're gonna get your grandma on there. She's gonna tell us about how to do magic for her bunions.
And as we mentioned earlier, if you would like to support the objectively best podcast on the occult today, you can go check us out at patreon.com/chaosmagicnews, where as for a paltry $5 a month, you can get bonus episodes where we do things like, I don't know, read the Zoetic Grimoire. We've also done readings for the Magic Without Tears by Crowley. We've been doing an occult iceberg where us and the regular goons go and have a good laugh at some weird occult topics in an occult iceberg that we found. All that and so much more, including getting your name read right here. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Cios93. Thank you, Pope Loki Satyr the 23rd LLC. Thank you, Obsbleck. Thank you, Coco. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Acolyte 1 of the Ice Magic Meditation Society. Thank you, Cursed T. Thank you, Fyodor Krasny. Thank you, Venus Christ. Thank you, Tent Athena. Thank you, Bearded Vegan. Thank you, Tremov. Thank you, Tangy Darling. Thank you, DD Destruction. Thank you, Toziel Obscurus. Thank you, The Lavender Ghost. Thank you, Tommy Kelly. Thank you, Clodvis. Thank you, Cyrenix Flux. Thank you, Eric the Wizard. Thank you, Marcio Mendoza. Thank you, Archaic. Thank you, Michael Lamar. And thank you to the local family. So if you would like to be a part of that wonderful list we just read off, then go on and check us out over there.
And we thank you so much. If you've listened this far, your support and tolerance for pain really does mean the world to us. Thank you so much.
We appreciate each and every one of you. If you don't want to, if you don't want to give us $5, you can support us by dropping comments, sharing the pod, giving us good reviews, all the places. You know how this shit works.
Yeah,
if you like us, help us. Help a brother out.
Help a brother out. Now, my goal is to blot out my conscious desire for this show to do better so that it will just happen.
Oh, we weren't already doing that?
In the meantime,
why is this show so
guys
bad?
Stop. Oh, fuck it. You can have the last word. I'm done.
Oh, man. All right. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. We will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
If you are Superman, let me be forever animal.
Read that again.
Okay.
Not even making fun of you. Like, this isn't me picking
I was
at
going to
you.
edit it together, obviously. But
oh, man. I mean, like, just make it easier on yourself. Just read it correctly.
Only from negations. I hate you.
Sorry.
I hate you so much.
Here, go for it. You can do it.
No, we're good.
I believe in you.
And then we'll just note that later during...
We'll just note later that I'm going to make another loud, obnoxious noise.
God damn it. I hate you so much.